So, a lot of people think that the future of African aviation depends on creating more demand. They're wrong. The real opportunity is something far more ambitious and cool, rethinking how airlines grow in the first place. Welcome back to Brand Space's Future Picks, the podcast in which we pick up on and break down all the innovative technology, events, and strategies that are transforming the aviation and travel retailing industry. I'm your host, Clarissa Jenkins. At least this was one of the defining themes to emerge from AviaDev Africa 2026, held in Gaborone, Botswana, where airline leaders from across the globe joined forces to challenge some of the longest held assumptions and explore what comes next for the industry. And whom better to join me than Jon Howell, founder and CEO of AviaDev Africa, while we explore why Africa has a unique opportunity, not to inherit legacy aviation models, but to leapfrog them. From AI and mobile first innovation and smarter payment approaches and the collaboration that goes into all of this. This conversation is going to reveal why some of the aviation's boldest retailing ideas emerge from markets with the freedom to think differently. So let's get into it. Okay, well, thank you so much, Jon Howell, for joining me today on Brand Space's Future Picks podcast. How are we feeling?
Yeah, wonderful. Thanks, Clarissa. It's really nice to be here, and it's nice to be on the other side of the mic for once.
Exactly. Especially after you completed AviaDev's extensive 2026 cycle. I'm sure you're excited, happy to be back, a little bit more relaxed. And now you have the time to reflect on the most recent event and some of its emerging trends. Would you say that's agreeable?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's an interesting world living in an events world because, of course, it is cyclical. We only do one event a year, so that even though we're talking in June here in 2026, it's like our crescendo is the beginning of June every year. We work towards that, and then it's take a deep breath time and work towards next year's event. So yeah, it's nice to have that cycle because, of course, there's pressure on, pressure off, but we're never really turned off. We're always tuned into the industry, and it gives me opportunities to do things like this.
Yeah, you got to be. You got to stay competitive and in the know. And so, with that being said, for those who aren't aware, could you please tell us a bit about AviaDev and maybe some of the key summary points from this year's?
Yeah, sure. So AviaDev Africa in AviaDev itself is the only dedicated air service development event for Africa. So what that means is we are 100% focused on developing new routes to, from, and within Africa. But when we say new routes, also that could be expansion of existing routes, so more frequencies on the same route, or maybe even deploying a bigger aircraft on the same route, putting more seats onto that particular route. That is route development. So that's the
And I've
core
noticed that as
focus.
well. There's been a lot of fleet acquisitions and purchases going on all over the world, but definitely within Africa within these past few months. So I'm really excited to dive into that with you.
Yeah, that we're trying. We're trying. There's a backlog, I think, of 18,000 planes that are on order. So it could take quite a few years until those planes come through. And that's one of the challenges is access to the metal to actually serve the routes that exist. But yeah, our job is to turn those conversations into routes, and we do that through our forum once a year, where we bring together the airlines that are interested, either already flying within Africa or to and from, or they're interested in expanding service, starting service, along with the airports, the tourism authorities, and then all of the big suppliers to the industry. So all of the big manufacturers like Airbus, Boeing, Embraer, ATR, Rolls-Royce, these kind of companies. And they want to know what's going on in Africa, and they believe in the opportunity, as do we.
And I couldn't help but wonder whether the biggest challenge that might be facing Africa at the moment is that it has fundamentally changed. What we saw before or
Mm,
historically were conversations that revolved around stimulating demand and
mm.
improving connectivity, especially through, digital adoption, mobile app adoption. And now I'm curious, today, many airlines clearly see the demand, but struggle to access the aircraft, all the back orders, the metal that's necessary to go into making them, manufacturing them, but also the capital that's required to serve it.
Mm.
This all presents a very different challenge, I believe. Totally different, almost like the opposite end of the spectrum. And do you think that it's fair to say that this is the next constraint on African aviation growth?
Yeah, I think, look, The first thing to say is, yeah, it's a new forum for us. There has been air finance conferences in
Hmm.
the past, right, for Africa. There hasn't been one, and there was this sort of need for a home, but we had a lot of support from the leasing community. So we already had banks, we had lessors coming to us saying AviaDev is already a good place for us to do business without a dedicated stream. So what we had in the past was we had a leasing kind of a couple of panels dedicated to leasing rather than a whole day, a whole morning, which is what we did this year. And so we don't create our program, just to start with that in isolation. I do it with an advisory board. I have leasing companies on my advisory board, and we sit down and say, how would we structure this? Who's it for? Who can we attract? And it was a massive success. We've tried different things the last couple of years. We did an airport real estate forum, which went really well. And last year we did a tourism and connectivity forum to try and get the tourist boards more involved. This year we did finance and leasing,
I've
and I can safely say that will stay. Yeah.
I do want to know more about what the
Yeah.
catalyst was for starting everything.
So I think back, when I started doing this, and it was our 10th anniversary in Botswana, and I've been working in Africa for 14 years now, but 10 years with AviaDev. And demand used to be the constraint, and people were like, there isn't the demand, there isn't the market for it. Now it's actually capital is the new constraint. That is the constraint. So, you can liberalize all the markets in the world, but if an airline can't access the right equipment at the right price with the right financing, suddenly that route is unviable. And what I mean by that is African carriers will pay 25% more than the European counterpart on average for a leasing fee. When a European airline can access finance at 3% interest or 5% interest, African banks will lend it to an airline at 30%. Can you imagine paying 30%? It's like credit card versus home loan, right? You're seen as a not in every case, but these are the kind of numbers we're talking about. And so, it's a real challenge in terms of how do you bridge that gap and how do you make Africa less, from a perceived perspective, less risky? Because of course risk drives the price and risk drives the interest rates, and that's what we're trying to obviously reduce as well. And we had a whole panel and whole session talking about how do you actually do this, because some of it is down to the airlines and some of it is just they're victims of a perception rather than the truth. So that
That
is
was,
that is
yeah,
something
my
we can't
next
fight.
question. Yeah, was what do you think that reason is, that perception or historical things versus financial conservatism, perhaps, is how it could be stated if it's coming directly from the government.
Do you know what it is?
Is that,
If you're going to be completely pragmatic, the
yeah,
pragmatic thing is I'm a leasing company. I have one aircraft and I have 30 airlines that want it. Am I going to lease it to the blue chip airline with 300 aircraft that, I might get a lower return, but they've already got 50 of my planes. I'll give them another one. Or am I going to take a risk on this new startup or this small airline in a part of the world I don't really know? And if I am going to take that risk, you better be paying me really well to take the risk. Otherwise,
true.
I'm going to give it to this airline. And that's the issue we have in the market with, say, a backlog of like 18,000 aircraft. People are fighting over what's available, and you're all in the queue. But obviously, certain airlines and certain jurisdictions are less attractive. It's not just an African problem, but because obviously there's a spectrum of airlines. There are blue chip airlines and startup carriers and everything in between. But that is the pragmatic truth. And that is, I understand it. The leasing company is agnostic. I want to get the best return, which is not just the most money, but it's also the safest bet. I want to know that if you default on the lease, I can come to your country and I can get that plane back and I can repossess it and not have hassles. And we've had issues with that before. So like these are the systemic issues that we face
Hmm.
that are obviously impacting access.
Okay. That's also good. Thank you for providing that insight into what's going on now. But then there's that destination that we're aiming for
Mm.
in the future. And this leads really well, I think, into, you said we're talking about the revenue performance, in order to fund these new airports or these new planes, et cetera, you have to have revenue. And have you noticed any ways that airlines are thinking about improving revenue performance beyond those load factors? For example, we could see ancillary revenue, packaging, stopovers, partnerships. I'd love to hear more about that.
So look. the African average load factor, and I suppose one thing just to point out here is AviaDev is sub-Saharan focused, so we don't have North Africa in our remit, but a lot of the numbers that are reported as Africa. I find that difficult. I mean, it's difficult anyway when people say, "Oh, how's Africa? Where should I?" It's different within a country, never mind within the continent. So just to point that out, but we of course use the numbers from IATA. They have the load factors. Africa's load factor performance is going up, but it's still one of the lowest in the world as a percentage. And because there is that thing, but ultimately the old adage, which is load factor is vanity, whereas yield and total revenue per seat is sanity, right? Like that's what keeps everything going. And so there is another phrase that's been coined most predominantly by Embraer, which is about right sizing. So it's use the right tool for the right route. Don't put too many seats into a route if it can't sustain it. And that's where it's really interesting in the African context, in every jurisdiction, but obviously with my experience, that you might have an airline like Airlink, which is the biggest private airline in Africa, run out of South Africa, with 70 odd Embraers, but it doesn't have one type of Embraer. It's got a package from smaller 30 seaters all the way through to 120. So what it can do is say, on that route, today we've only got this many passengers, we'll deploy a smaller plane, or they can kind of decide on the day. Almost, they've got a choice and they can
I was
pick and
gonna ask, can
mix.
they decide like that last minute on the
Because
day, or
when you
even
buy
like?
a ticket, it will tell you what aircraft you're flying, right? But they reserve the right to change that. And with Airlink and with Embraer, they're all jet, so it's not like
Mhm.
it's not like one is fast and one is slow. They go at the same speed, because that is an
Yeah.
issue with certain airlines that maybe have turboprops that are slower, so the sector would take longer. So if you swap out a jet for a turboprop, it's going to take you longer to get there, right? So you've got airlines like that are very flexible. There's a lot of complexity with the operations when it comes to that. But the flip side is you have airlines that are uniform, right? The traditional low cost model that you would have talked about with your friend in Asia, where you've got a single aircraft type like the Ryanair, the EasyJet, the Southwest type model, and we have one like called FlySafair Air in South Africa, but it operates 737-800s. They're big
Mhm.
planes. So
Yeah.
their routes that they're going to deploy to have to be dense. They have to be enough to be able to cope with 190 seats on every flight. Whereas Airlink can fly a route that only needs 30 seats, and maybe they can break even if it's a high end safari route. Maybe they can have 15 people on board and make money because these guys are paying top dollar to travel on that particular route, or they're the only airline flying that route. So, that's what's so fascinating to me about the dynamics of route development is we've got all these players that have got different strategies of how they're going to attack the market. But we're seeing, to your point, huge development in terms of what they are doing. They've always been aware of the situation. And unfortunately, a lot of the airlines are handicapped by incredibly high costs of fuel, high costs of operation, high costs of leasing, as we've talked about already. So they've got to pay those bills every month, and also high costs from the airports. The airports charge a lot. The air traffic navigation services charge a lot more than the average around the world. So it's very hard to make money in a high operating cost environment, no matter what industry you're in. But they're being very, they're being very clever. And I think the one that I would pick out, which I've seen and we've promoted heavily as a trend the last 6 or 7 years, is what we call the interlining, where the airlines in Southern Africa, for example, they provide that last mile delivery. So Qatar Airways brings you from Doha to Johannesburg, and then they fly you from Johannesburg to the Safari Lodge. And that's on one ticket with Qatar, but they get their cut of that, and everybody is happy. And Qatar Airways, for example, have actually invested in Airlink as well. They own 25% of Airlink as well. So that's a sign of confidence in the market. But there's just one example for you.
Okay, okay, that's awesome. I'm really glad you brought up the interlining portion specifically. I think most traditionally it's almost called like code sharing for the passenger. You experience it through a connection flight, but that's what I want to ask is there a difference? And if so, what is that difference? Like that shift, what makes it so niche that interlining still
Yeah,
needs to have
look,
its own name?
I'm I'm not going to get the definition right, but I understand the difference. So code sharing is an official part, an official partnership. You're on the single ticket where you actually have a proper relationship, if that makes sense. Like you're married to that carrier. Interlining is much more like you're dating, right? Like you're using their network to get on. And the thing that it gives the airline is it gives the airline flexibility to interline with anybody they want. They're not bound by an agreement to say, if I code share with you, then this airline can't code share with me. And so why would you code share when you can interline? Is maybe a new t-shirt we should do. But that's basically how it works. It's less commitment. You could go to a party with, hey guys, I'm just interlining. I don't know, right?
Nope, and you're so right. We want to bring that like symbiotic relationship. So hopefully, if you're in an interlining, there's beneficial for both airlines or all three airlines or whatever the network is that's going on versus like an alliance,
That's like the top. So you've got
yeah.
interlining, code sharing, and then alliance would be right at the top, really, in terms
And
of the relationship.
airlines only leave, once every 25, 28 years, which we've seen most recently with some partners. So there is like you said, that commitment dynamic.
Yeah, that's basically the best way to put it, because I like doing things in layman's terms, right? And it is easy to understand that interlining is that least commitment, but both parties are getting benefit, right? You
Mhm.
set the agenda and it's much more flexible that you can start and stop it. You can interline on particular routes. You don't have to give them access to your whole network. You can work with multiple partners. And I know I've heard some numbers about how much this has improved some of these regional carriers' feed because they're not having to go and get those customers themselves. They're being fed them by this
Mm.
big brother, big partner. And some of these airlines don't have ambitions to either own a wide body aircraft and fly to Europe or the US or wherever. Their job, they see it, and there is enough abundance, and I believe it too. And I believe that's why many fail and why many are successful is they focus on the market that they're good at, and then they work with partners to feed that market. And that's, again, it's this whole thing that we're trying to do at AviaDev is it's not just about the airports and the airlines. We actually put the airlines together and say, right, you guys talk and you get to know each other, and you might be competitors, but actually when you come to it, you're not a competitor. Is Qatar Airways a competitor to a small airline that's feeding the domestic market in East Africa? No, because it can't fly
No,
those routes. So it should then say, right, how do we work together for mutual benefit? And we're seeing that. So for me, that's kind of the number one trend. And there's some very cool technology out there that's enabling the interlining. And it's a very common thing now globally, but Africa's really benefited.
I think you're so right. You mentioned it earlier, the operational side, it's only as good as your operations are if you can work together as an airline and not beyond, passenger disruption management, but crew management, crew communication within the individual airlines, but then amongst themselves when all of a sudden the route switch or the plane has switched and now you were performing an interlining, whereas maybe you weren't before. Like you said, there are several products that are good out there to include. Gotta give a shout out to Trip Lake Notify Me across passenger and operations communication and disruption management. But that is one of the key topics that I've seen all over the industry that is not AI solely.
No, no, that's true. And there's a really nice African proverb that sums this up that you'll hear at a lot of African conferences, which is if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together, right? Which is lovely, but it's a little bit overused, but it's a really nice metaphor for what's happening in terms of what we trying to do is build those relationships, build those partnerships, build that trust and say, this isn't a zero-sum game. I do not have to lose for you to win. We can both win if we collaborate rather than see each other as the enemy and we're both after Mr. Smith over here. No, why don't we get Mr. Smith to bring Mr. Jones with him and then we can both get a passenger, right? Like grow the market rather than feeling that you're having to take from somebody else. And, it's not a zero-sum game. As I say, growth comes from seeing that the world's abundant and you can grow the cake and everybody can benefit as a result. So like collaboration is a word that, we said if you say that at the event, you have to, take a drink or something
Oh,
because it's
don't
overused,
overuse
right?
it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's overused because people say it, but it's a throwaway comment often. It doesn't, really we need to get to the nub of what are we doing? Not just we need to collaborate. Let's actually, how are we going to do it? Let's get to the nitty gritty and let's challenge people on it.
The devil's in the details. That's what.
It,
And so, with that being said, I would love to know about more about the adaptation or how the airlines are adopting in a holistic manner technology. Are there certain ways that carriers are partnering or approaching a digital first strategy? And, I've got to bring it up. What's going on with AI adoption? What's
yeah.
the strategy towards that? Uh, incremental pilots versus strategic rewiring. Give us all the details on what's more popular and where you see it going in the future.
Well, I think the headline here, Clarissa, is very simple, which is what Africa shouldn't do is try and retrofit what exists now, right? It should leapfrog to what's coming next, right? It shouldn't be thinking, how do I get that legacy thing, which is what they're having to do with the fleet, right? Is sort of saying, oh, I'm going to have to go and get a 15-year-old aircraft because I can't get a new one. That's partly through financing and partly through availability. With technology, it's very different because actually the technology is becoming cheaper and easier to plug and play than it ever was, right? And more capable. So you don't necessarily have to go, what was this airline doing 5 years ago, which was top of the market? You can go straight and do that leapfrogging. So question for you, have you ever heard of M-PESA? Do you know what M-PESA is?
Is it going to be bad if I say no?
No, that's fine, right? Because I'm going to tell you the story of M-PESA. So M-PESA was created in Kenya in 2007 by Safaricom, which was part of like Vodafone. And
Okay.
basically what it was a way to pay little micro loans, basically, but using your mobile phone.
I,
And it was pioneered. So when you and me didn't even have, iPhones and all the rest of it, right? Kenya they were paying with phones, right? Before we had
yeah.
Apple Pay, before we had Venmo, whatever it is you call it in the US, right? We don't have that here, but so we now have this as common. But this is what happened in Kenya because people didn't have bank accounts. They didn't operate on this, that, and the other. It was day to day, and it was a secure way to transfer that money, right? The reason I bring that up is there's your example of where Africa was the first because it didn't go, what is the rest of the world doing? It said, what do we need and what infrastructure do we have? So they didn't have laptops necessarily, but everybody had a phone. And therefore, you find a solution, you create a technology where you do that. So where does that lead us to? That leads us to mobile first solutions from a technology perspective, 100%. On the AI perspective, we work with a company called Q. They've brought this thing out called Qt, so it's KIUT. And it's they've got the first AI agent working with an airline called ValueJet in Nigeria that's helping with all of lots of the queries, lots of the very simple things and simple changes. And that's obviously evolving and becoming more able as it goes. And we did an interview talking around that. So there's just one example. But ultimately, this is the headline. The headline is, don't think about today. Go and say, what's the most forward thinking solution you've got? Because that's what we want for the future. And that is the catalyst to then be digital first and not have to worry about this legacy infrastructure. Just go straight, instead of saying, where do I put my cables for my fiber? No, just go straight to Wi-Fi, satellite-based Wi-Fi. It's cheaper, it's easier, and it's more powerful, and it's a better solution. So that's what we're hearing is the airlines are very open to this and they're very forward thinking with the technology. But they're just a few examples, but I wanted to share that little M-PESA story because I think it just shows the ambition of what Africa can achieve when it really creates a solution for the market it's serving rather than imports a solution from a different market. That doesn't work in terms of airline models. We've seen that, but it doesn't work in terms of technology either.
I am so okay. First of all, it makes a lot of sense. It makes so much sense when you really think about it because one, if you're always trying to get to, say, whoever's that gets in position and catch up to whoever top dog is, then you're always going to be behind because top dog's always moving too. The other
And their
element.
solution isn't going to be your solution.
Exactly. Like we say, everybody's different. Every culture is different. There's so much incredible talent in Africa and intelligence and vibrancy. But to your point, there's a few different elements kind of working against or not working against, but that they have to adapt to. Just like every market has to. It doesn't matter where you are. There's always elements to adapt to.
It's the most entrepreneurial place on earth, right? Because people don't
Yeah.
have social security. They don't have that safety net. You have to do something. You have to be active. You have to create ideas. And then the second thing with the technology is you also don't, the beauty nowadays is you don't need to take the whole package. You say, I'll have that bit, and that bit, because that's all I need for my airline at the moment. And that will be at a cost that makes sense. And that is always the advice that our technology providers give is, why would you buy a solution that an Emirates needs if you're not an Emirates, right? Why would you buy that solution like we all do when it comes to software? You don't need that plan if you're just this size. You just need the right plan in the same way you need the right aircraft, right? It's about don't overstretch yourself and don't pay for things you're not going to use.
Yeah, we see that with NDC, some
Hmm.
airlines like purchasing NDC about 5 years ago and just now starting the implementation work on it, which is great. At least they're starting it and they're doing it, but it's kind of over with.
I think with NDC, what I saw was it felt like the people in it were like, you need all or nothing. Whereas actually, if it had been drip fed and said, let's just start with these products and prove it works and then build on top, I think that approach may have got us to a place that's better, quicker. And I think that often is a good approach anyway. You go with kind of some basic options. And I know a few airlines that are doing that at the moment because they want to prove the concept. They don't want to just throw everything there and then it not work, or it confuse the system and confuse the passenger as well. So, it's what people are used to in terms of the culture of how they book a ticket. Do they just expect, I'm doing a 1 hour flight, but I expect a hot meal. I expect a big chair. Do they expect that? And then when you say, no, you've got to pay for luggage, you've got to pay for food, you've got to pay, they're like, no, this isn't culturally. Some people don't understand. They think all of it should be included. And it
Mhm.
takes a real cultural shift to be able to unbundle that and to communicate that to the traveling public.
And we're about to see maybe some changes to that rule about being airlines might be required to provide not only a handbag, but also a overhead carry-on for all ticket bearers. And then extending it to you shouldn't have to pay for baggage if you're traveling with a minor, things like that. So trying to give that empowerment and give that guess, like, not feeling a little like we're being, like, cheapskate here and there, getting little grabs at, like, here little at a
But
time, but
but the
it's
airline the
also
airline would argue that that
they can
helps
do
them.
that, they can do that. I mean, look at Ryanair, 70% is ancillaries. They completely flipped the strategy on its head. Totally different side from where we see it. When you're talking about the phased approach, yes, that's exactly what Triple is for us. It's a modular platform. And, whether it's KM Malta, completely kind of rebuilding their loyalty program and the loyalty interface and the customer journey, but at a very phased approach, or whether it's Oman Air and launching their very first stopover program. If you don't do part A right, the probability of part B, C, D, and E going right only gets lower. And it takes patience and it might feel like it's a bit, minuscule, but again, devil's in the details.
It builds trust and it builds confidence, and then that
Hmm.
snowballs, right? Whereas if you say, I want you to go from here to here, and that's your only stepping stone, right? You're looking at the river saying, you've got to cross from here to here. And there's no, whereas if I put a load of stepping stones in, you go, I can see how we can do that. So let's get to the first one. And then I'll tell you whether I want to go back or whether I want to go to the next one, right? And it's that kind of analogy that I think works with so many elements, but we're very hungry to provide the solution. I think that's part of the world. I posted about this the other day. Like, you've got to enjoy the process, but everybody's desperate to get the quickest, fastest solution. And it's so empty because often if you use AI to get that solution, it's not even your solution. And yeah, you
Hmm.
got it, but you didn't have to work for it. So you don't value it. It wasn't yours. And it's the same with this process. It should be evolutionary. It should be iterative. Good things take time. That's why we live as many years as we live. And that's why good things take time to grow, right? It shouldn't all be about immediate scale.
I do want to switch gears a little bit to the payment side, which
Yeah.
you mentioned about the fintech journey within Africa. But I noticed that payments did come up as a priority throughout AviaDev this year. And so I'm really curious to know within that now, what payment innovations or partnerships did you see airlines exploring? Could be at the event, or maybe you're just hearing some like word on the street. Do you think, and how are those going to incrementally, but also tangibly accelerate conversion or revenue capture?
Yeah. Okay. So the first thing to say is this year we had 3 different payment solutions sponsors of the event. So straight away
Hmm.
they see number one Africa and AviaDev as a place to have these conversations because of course we're bringing the commercial teams. Secondarily, obviously the payment element has maybe been overlooked for some time, and now it needs to absolutely be accelerated because the cheapest revenue an airline can get is the sale it's losing at the till, right? If it's too cumbersome to pay and I don't have that access to that particular payment solution, then I'm going to have to, abort that transaction, which is heartbreaking for the airline. They're thinking, why did somebody do this? And if the reason they did that is because you didn't take my payment, it's incumbent on the airline to work with a partner that can offer a payment solution that anybody can pay for. And I think, we talked about M-PESA before. This is actually Africa's advantage. Card penetration is low, but mobile money is high. And alternative payment methods, even Bitcoin and all of these type of things, they exist and they're actually dominant in this respect. So there's also payment solutions where you can pay in installments. You might buy a pair of shoes on a solution like Klarna. There are airlines that are bringing payment solutions in to say, look, we know this is an expensive fare, so you can pay in 3 installments, and a payment solutions provider will offer that. And the other huge element here is protecting against fraud, because it's huge for the airline. It's huge for the industry as a whole. And of course, you can lose all of your profit can be eroded through credit card fraud or whatever. And you've got all that hassle. So by working with a reputable payment provider that obviously puts the safeguards in place in the first place and can eliminate or reduce the fraud or investigate it on your behalf, it gives you that peace of mind that no matter how they want to pay, it's not up to us. It's like us saying this podcast can only be a video. No, you should put it out as an audio as well, right? And you should give people the opportunity to say, how do you want to consume it? In the same way as an airline should say, how do you want to pay for the ticket? Do you want to pay with a card? Do you want to pay with M-PESA? Do you want to pay in 3 installments? We can facilitate that. So long as we get all our money before you fly and we know that that money is coming from a
Legal
non-fraudulent
manners.
place,
Yeah.
then so be it. I don't know whether they can check whether it's legal or not, but they
Yeah.
just want to make sure it's cleared funds and they're not being hoodwinked by it. So I think you've got that as a huge opportunity, and the airlines now are really waking up to it because every single transaction involves a transaction, right? And the payment guys, again, they may be looking at, oh my goodness, we're paying this company X amount per transaction. That could be eroding their entire profit margin. Work with a partner where they've got scale, they've got a solution that works for you, where they're actually adding value. And yes, of course, they've got to get paid, but you've got to find the right solution for the right payment. So yeah, we've worked with a few of these different providers. They're super interesting. They're doing amazing things. And ultimately, for us, if you have a solution that's either making an airline more money or it's saving them cost, that we're the platform. In the same way, if you have a solution for an airport that's doing that too, because the airlines are the one partner in the room that might be the sexy one. They're the ones that are probably making the lowest profit out of everybody in the room at AviaDev. And they know that, which is why we treat them like the VIPs they are.
It's like, it's almost as if you're saying with your analogies of putting it out to voice only, it's almost like you're just offering accessibility within the payment, the payment world, especially when it's so global, and we know based off our prior conversations that not every single company or technology is accepted there all over the world. And then that doesn't even get into currency differences and being able to calculate currency exchange rate, immediately. A follow-up question to this is, so let's say how with if you're in Google Chrome, you're able to save your card information. So anytime you go e-shopping, et cetera. But if there was a platform that existed, was integrated in with the airlines, so whether you're a loyalty member or not, whether you are flying there once a year, or whether you're going to fly, one leg with one airline, the next leg having the interlining perspective, it's that kind of checkout profile follows you along. And so you don't have to enter your passenger information over and over again. You don't have to,
Mm.
wait for that real time dynamic to happen. It's just boom, boom, you're confirmed. And all of your loyalty stuff is updated as well. You can earn, burn, things like that. I'm curious, is that on the same lines of what you're discussing? Or is that almost like a different categories like checkout versus PSP?
Yeah, I'd say it's different because one's sort of focused on the consumer experience and the other one's more
Okay.
the airline working with a payment solutions provider that does all those things for them. So, what we have to realize in Africa generally is that there isn't within Africa with Africans, there isn't a huge amount of leisure travel. Most people are traveling either to visit friends and relatives or for trading for work purposes. So some of those are individual entrepreneurs. They have their own M-PESA account or whatever it may be, and they will just book directly. We're seeing airline apps come through that can take payments, or they'll use an aggregator, an OTA, for example, or the larger companies like a lot would use a corporate travel agent. And I think that's what everybody struggles with as a whole in the world, right? With airlines is I feel like I have to be everywhere. I have to have a solution for the 75-year-old lady who's going to want to go in the travel agent with her post with her check and pay with the check, but because I don't want to lose a customer. And that must be so tricky because it's just like the check-in process. If you
Yeah.
take everybody to self-check-in, my mum, when she gets to the airport, she doesn't want to do that. She doesn't
Yeah.
trust it, right?
Or
So
Ryanair
you
with
end
the
up then,
digital, I think they got a lot of backlash for making all boarding passes digital. To your point with the check, yeah, my grandma still pays every single bill, like
there you go.
like mails the check for everything. And I'm
And there
honestly,
you go.
I'm give her
And then
props.
what Ryanair say is they're unapologetic. They say it's
Yeah,
okay, we'll do it, but if you do it at the airport, we'll charge you £50 to print it out.
was
You
that
can have
much?
it,
Okay,
but
interesting.
or whatever the price is, right?
Okay,
But
yeah,
whatever the amount is, the point is they're saying, but we will charge for that
yeah.
service. So you either conform or you pay to not conform, and
Hmm.
that is just their ethos and their attitude. Generally, is you need us more than we need you, and we treat you mean and keep you keen, kind of thing. That's their attitude to their customers, and it works for them.
You've actually already tapped into this a bit, like some more real world examples.
Hmm.
And but I'm wondering if there's any other specifically from AviaDev 2026 this year where you saw an airline, it could be a lease or even a technical provider, actually demonstrate those practical solutions that maybe everyone else turned around and was like, we should walk away and emulate that a bit.
Yeah, look, it's too early for 2026 because,
Yeah.
the truth is that what shakes out takes time.
Mm.
So what I'd like to do though is just, talk about what we did over the last couple of years. So there's an airline operating in Zambia called ProFlight Zambia. It's a private airline. It's been around a long time, but it was always domestic. It started coming to AviaDev and they came in a big number. 2 years ago, we were in beautiful Namibia for AviaDev in 2024. And they turned up and they had a meeting with the Namibians, and they had a meeting with the Botswanans, and they had a meeting with the South Africans in Cape Town. And these guys came prepared. They came with that amazing data process. They presented the business case. And I remember that she told the story on stage this year at AviaDev. It's on the YouTube channel. Kira from ProFlight, the commercial director, she basically said, we had this meeting. They showed us this incredible data. As soon as we finished the meeting, 5 minutes later, I had this 70-page deck with all this data in it. And they had built the business case why we should start flying to Cape Town. Fast forward 2 years, that was June 2024, and they now have 3 international routes. They serve Cape Town, they serve Maun in Botswana, and they serve Windhoek in Namibia. All 3 came from conversations at AviaDev over the last couple of years. They said that on stage. For us, it's not like we did the work, and it's not the guys that presented that data did the work, but we know that our platform, I don't want people saying, oh, the coffee was great and I had a really good night that night out, and wasn't the musician good? I do want them to say that, but I want them to say, we got a result, because ultimately that's our why. That's why we do what we do, is to say, has intra-African connectivity improved? Is the conditions improving? Are people more able to travel? Are we stimulating a market? They're the questions. So that's probably the best, the best example. And it's all about using data to make decisions, but taking your time and being consultative. So, there's an example for you from over the last couple of years.
Thank you so much for that. Yeah, it's all very good points. But I want to ask
Yeah.
you personally, before we get to that final question, ask you personally if there's anything that you'd like to discuss in relationship to AviaDev.
Yeah, I think something that I'd like to touch on, is the event design and the way that the event
Mm,
works. So, we talked about AviaDev itself, we've talked about the event, and the event happens once a year every June. But then through the year, I host the only number one podcast for African aviation, which is nearly 400 episodes. So that comes out pretty much every week. So you think 400 episodes, 8 years, one a week, right? We have a YouTube channel, so we're engaged. So we do the podcast, we have the YouTube channel, and then what I do is I'll go to a lot of the industry events, and by doing that, what I wanted to get to is the event design has been something that I've created with my COO based on our experiences of running events and attending events. What do we want? So what we do is very unique. We only do conference in the morning, 9 until 1, and then we do meetings in the afternoon, and we have a networking in the evening, a dinner or a reception. So you don't create that frustration of it's 8 hours of content, sit in a dark room, don't talk to anyone. So the event design is quite unique in that respect. Then you've got the one-to-one meetings happening in the afternoon, and we all know business is done at the bar, right? That's what people say, and it's very, it's very, very true at AviaDev too. So it's about creating those environments, and we're very different to the average industry event, maybe in aviation, in that our dinners are stand up walking around receptions. We had a live barbecue. We had the Ezra Neething, who is the number one artist in Botswana, perform for us, who was amazing. Live band. The vice president of the country turned up to the dinner and was just there chatting with people, because we'd spoken to him earlier in the day. And it's an atmosphere where everybody's engaged. They're all on the dance floor. There's the drinks are flowing, but it's easy, and it's designed by us to be networking heavy so that everybody doesn't feel that frustration. We don't clash content. So we don't go, oh, in room 1, you've got this. In room 2, you've got that. We just have one track at any one time. We don't do coffee breaks. If you want a coffee, we have 3 barista stations. You go out, you get your coffee, you come back in, you have your chat if you're not interested in that panel. We had smoothie bars on site as well, which we called the juice terminal, and then we had
That's where I would be the whole day.
Yeah, it was great. It was great because people want to be healthy, right? And that's the other
Yeah.
thing with the event design is we do the morning run around the stadium to give people that excuse to say, do you know what? I won't stay out till 2 a.m. and drink too much. I'll go to bed on a reasonable time. I'll get up because I want to run and I want to raise money
Yeah.
for charity, right?
Okay.
Some people do that.
That's
Some people
really
don't.
okay. You got me there.
So
I was just
event
not a runner.
design, I think, is probably the one thing that I want to say. But ultimately, the conference is over in 3 days. The route development discussions and the deals are done in the coming months, and that's where the juice is really coming from the conference. So for me, we loved it this year. We know people had a great time, but the actual litmus test is going to be when we see the new routes being announced.
Okay, that's great. That's so good to hear because it's a bit different than what I would say I've heard from other events or organizations. Okay, we're almost done, John. I have actually a few rapid questions. So
Yep.
3 rapid fire questions for you. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. 1, what is one book, resource, or even event you would recommend and why?
Okay, the book I'd recommend is this book. It's called Key Person of Influence by Daniel Priestley. I absolutely love it. I met him. I've had coaching from him. He's very famous now, but same age as me. Very, very successful businessman. Great way to learn. I actually have a second one because I've got to plug it. So this is my book. This is a very academic book. Strategies for Sustainable Air Service Development. So the first academic book on route development. I contributed a chapter and wrote the preface for this. So it's not my name on the front, but with the university professors, because that's a side project of mine. So one's academic, one's business focused. This is a great read, 2 hours, 3 hours. You can get through it, but it will give you the blueprint of how to become that in your industry, whatever it is. And he's got other books too, but is excellent. So there you go. Sorry, 2 books.
No,
jumped the gun,
appreciate
Clarissa.
that. No, you're good. I have read The Influence, and I felt the same way. You sometimes you ask yourself, like, how do I get to become that? How do you get that guy? How do you become that? This is the book to answer it. And now I know exactly what I'm going to order on my Kindle next.
Sign copy, Clarissa. Sign copy.
But now I know what I'm going to order next on my Kindle because what can you love more than aviation? Sustainable aviation. Let's go.
Yeah.
Number 2, what do you think will define the next phase of airline success in Africa? Do you think it'll be connectivity, capital access, commercial capability, all the C's?
Yeah, look, connectivity opens the route. Capital access gets us the aircraft to open the routes, and then commercial capability keeps them profitable, right? That's kind of the three things. Where do you start?
Keeps the roots.
It keeps the routes, right? So where do you start? You have to start with capital access. We've talked about it. That's number one. It all starts with money, like you need the money to be able to access the resource to start the route, and then you need to build the skills to maintain the route and to make sure it's profitable. So the answer is capital.
Fabulous. And then finally, but definitely not least, where should listeners follow AviaDev to not only find out about 2026 highlights, but make sure they're caught up and in the know about everything moving forward?
Well, we've already announced 2027. So 9th to the 11th of June, we're going to be in Lusaka, hosted by Zambia, by the government of
Heck yeah.
Zambia. So we're super excited to go there and visit the mighty Victoria Falls and the national parks and all the rest of it. Aviadev.com is our website. The podcast is called AviaDev Insight Africa. That's available on all the platforms, Spotify and Apple and Google, etc. There's AviaDev YouTube channel. The LinkedIn I would recommend is mine, Jon Howell. Follow me on there if you're interested in staying up to date with everything African aviation. And that's pretty much where you'll find me outside of, I don't use too much of the other platforms. I'm not
It
on
was
X,
quite
I'm
a
not on
lot. No,
TikTok,
I think you're good.
but
I'm not on TikTok.
LinkedIn is the big one. Yeah.
Thank you. I really appreciate that, John. Yeah, it's been quite a journey. Definitely different insights, different topics that I haven't been exposed to as much. And I'm sure some of our audience hasn't as well. But if one thing is very clear, as always, everything is connected. It's one giant ecosystem. Constantly I was just thinking little things pop in my head, like how relatable that is to our portion, our technology, Trip Lake, the consulting work that our Transform team does. So I just want to say thank you once again for coming on today, Brand Stace's Future Picks, and any last minute shout outs. But other than that, we'll catch y'all later.
Just want to say thank you, Clarissa, for inviting me on. It's been a real pleasure, and hopefully, people enjoyed it, and I definitely did. So yeah, we'll do it again sometime soon.